That may be the greatest catch I've ever seen in my life.
Okay, y'all know a very long time ago we went out there and we looked at some early round rookie draft strategy. Well, here we are going to be going to the later rounds. Here we are going to be diving into what you should be doing in rounds 2 and 3. And at the end of the video, I will talk about some draft targets that I'm going to be having based off of this research. Now, of course, I know a lot of people have probably already read this chapter from our Dynasty research book. So, of course, thank you so much for everybody who's gotten their hands on that book, whether they purchased it on flockfantasy.com or they got it by signing up for our sponsor Underdog Fantasy with promo code FLOCK. I genuinely appreciate y'all. And of course, if you have not gotten your hands on our Dynasty research book yet, please make sure you go do so. You're going to get a small taste of what you can find in that book in this video. On top of that, we have a ton of information about historical age cliffs. We have information on where you should be drafting your rookie quarterbacks, rookie tight ends. We have information on what to be doing for a rebuilding roster, a contending roster, whether you should contend or rebuild. We have information on the tight end premiums. There's so much over there. Please go get that on flockfantasy.com or sign up for Underdog Fantasy with promo code FLOCK. And over there on Underdog Fantasy, you can get into some drafts with us on the live stream. You can go check out some player props at the same time. And when you deposit on Underdog Fantasy with promo code FLOCK, only $10 will get you our Dynasty research book. And on top of that, our Dynasty rankings and our Dynasty rookie rankings updated for the next month. So thank y'all so much, of course, for all that support. And that should be it. Let's go through. Let's dive into this. And before we get into round 2, round 3, just in case you were unable to check this book out yet, just in case you were unable to watch our early round strategy about a month ago, I will give a quick recap of our findings in round 1 and just how we are going to be going through and running this process. So what I did for this Dynasty research book is I looked at 7 draft classes. We looked at the 2014, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, and 20 draft classes. The reason I decided to pull from this time frame is simply that is when we had DLF ADP. Dynasty League Football began tracking Dynasty Startup ADP back in 2014. Not a sponsorship by any means, but that's where we got the information. So, of course, thank you all so much for them. And what we did is we tracked the players' startup ADP in June, their rookie season. So before they stepped on a football field. So about where these rookies are valued now. And we tracked that after their rookie season to see the immediate jump that these players had or if they fell back. And then we tracked that after their second year as well. And after your second year, we have a great idea if you were going to be a hit in Dynasty or if you were a massive bust. And before everybody goes down there and says, Mason, 2 years is not nearly enough. And Mason, I mean, how can you call a player a bust after 2 years? My friends, I don't know how to say this, but you should be trading in your Dynasty League. If you drafted Jalen Reagor 2 years ago, despite him only having 2 years under his belt so far, he is a bust. You missed on that pick. If you think that he can still have a great career and he's not a bust after 2 years, we better be going out and trading for him. Okay, so I think that we can confidently say after 2 years, we have a good understanding of where the value lies with these players. And because we are looking at that 2-year mark, I apologize, but the 2021 class is not going to be included in this data set. If we ever write a second Dynasty research book, possibly we can go through and we can update this with a slightly larger sample, but we have hundreds and hundreds of rookies that we're looking at. So we're completely fine with this sample size. And in round 1, big thing that we found is at the very top of your rookie draft, when you have a player like Breece Hall at the running back position, you draft that elite running back. Every single time, we are so much better at identifying the elite running backs and their hit rate than we are going to be at the receiver position. Then we found that later on in round 1, that trend kind of flipped. The running backs that were being pushed up at the back half of round 1, a lot of those players had red flags on their profiles and they were getting pushed up based on, just the Dynasty market needing running backs, the Dynasty market being hungry for running backs. And this led to guys like Ronald Jones, Sony Michel with red flags being drafted too highly when they weren't deserving. And a lot of wide receivers in that range, players like DK Metcalf, AJ Brown, they were fantastic values because they had elite receiver profiles. And really, there weren't too many teams just dying to go out there and grab a wide receiver. So we found that since 2014, really, in round one, if you have that elite running back prospect, if you have a Breece Hall on the board, you're drafting Breece Hall. But please don't be pushing up running backs that are undeserving to the back half of round one, like an Isaiah Spiller, if they don't belong there and there are top receiving options still available on the board. That's why we recently decided to move players like Chris Olave over Isaiah Spiller in our Dynasty rankings a couple weeks ago. But let's transition this thought process. Let's transition this over to round two. There were a couple other trends that we noticed with round one, but of course you can check that out in our Dynasty research book. And let's break this down again as we did with round one. Let's go early round two, mid round two, late round two, just to get an overall feel. And yes, we're looking at overall startup ADP. Overall startup ADP, because that's the easiest to track over 3 years. And also it balances it out when you have a class like the 2017 draft class that was just loaded with stud after stud after stud versus the 2019 class. Some people were taking N'Keal Harry at the 101. But here in the early second round, we see that really you do have a lot of running backs gaining on value year one. But what's interesting is very rarely were these RBs actually able to sustain that value. The wide receivers were better bets to consistently gain value over the long term. Now, there is an outlier with this running back in Kareem Hunt, in that, of course, Kareem Hunt lost value based on an off-the-field incident that you're not able to predict. So if Kareem Hunt did not have that, well, the running back data would look a little bit better here, but it would still be under 20% for the running backs that were able to gain value after their second season. But with receivers, you still see a couple players that had great profiles that end up turning into top 10 dynasty picks that have access to that elite level ceiling. You have players like Juju Smith-Schuster, Allen Robinson in this range. Now, in our Dynasty rookie draft guide, we'll talk about exactly what we're looking for with these rookie profiles, and I'll prove to you historically how our model has been able to identify these players in later rounds that have a better chance at hitting than others. So I'm excited to release that, of course, a little bit later. But with the grand scheme of things, we can't have any massive takeaways here. You definitely looks like you prefer investing into these receivers as they possibly have a higher ceiling, possibly they're more likely to gain value after year two, but there's nothing that screams we need to be doing so. And with our next round, very similar. We don't necessarily know where we should be taking this. I mean, you have David Johnson with the elite ceiling. You see David Johnson gaining on value clearly after his rookie year and then turning into that top 10 dynasty pick. You also have a couple other running backs gaining on value like AJ Dillon. Now, what I want to focus in on is not whether you should be drafting running back or receiver at this range of the draft. At this range of the draft, it really comes down to your prospect evaluation and what you are thinking, because a lot of these RBs are guys that go on day two, or players that are drafted in the third round of the NFL draft where they do have that path to get opportunity. So when you have that path to get opportunity, when you're a day two running back, what we need to be doing is really relying on our running back prospect model, trying to look at those players that have 3-down upside, look at those players that could flash, and trust our process. Now, at receiver, if y'all remember round one, what was very, very interesting is we never had any V-shapes in the graph. You never had a player losing value, then gaining value. You never had a player gaining value, then losing value after their first versus after their second season. It was very consistent. If a player hit year one and they gained dynasty value, they were going to continue to gain value. And our hypothesis with this is, well, it kind of makes sense for those receivers in that if they hit year one, we know that they're talented and we should probably just go all in, assuming that they're going to continue to develop. And with those round one rookie wide receivers, what is very telling in that when they lost value after their rookie season, they almost continue to lose value 9 times out of 10. I think the exact number was like 76% of the time they continued to either lose or gain value depending on how their rookie season went. They continued that trend. And the reason for that is those round one wide receivers, they were drafted with the assumption they were getting on the field right away. They were drafted by their NFL teams, by their coaching staffs, their general manager. They were drafted by dynasty managers with the assumption that they were an elite level talent, that they were going to get that opportunity. So when they either didn't get it, they didn't manage to go and just get on the field with the path that was clearly laid out for them, or when they did get snaps and they just weren't able to draw targets, look at N'Keal Harry, look at Jalen Reagor, then that's a massive red flag, and it tells you, hell, this guy's not working out. Sell low, just move on. Whereas once we get a little bit later here with these wide receivers, you saw this with the last round, that continued trend rate began to take a dip. It was no longer at 75, 80%. It came down to 58%. And here in the middle of the second round, with these receivers, we see a trend that a lot of these guys, 100% of these players, do not continue their path. Now, of course, the reason it's at 100% is because it's a small sample. We're looking at a sample of about 12, 13 players in this range. So, of course, that's way too small to ever say you always sell high on a mid-round 2 rookie wide receiver. You always buy low on these players. But this is the marking point. And the reason for this, the players that lose value from this point, there is the outside chance that they were able to gain value after that year 2, where the round 1 wide receivers couldn't, because the expectation was not for these guys to be able to get on the field right away. The expectation was a lot of these players have incomplete profiles with upside that maybe they're not going to produce year 1, but we shouldn't give up on them early because maybe they have to just jump a couple other receivers on the depth chart. I hope that makes sense. Of course, that's just a hypothesis. That's how I'm interpreting the data. That's how I'm looking at this player set. Of course, I would love to know your opinion, but I think the reason that we see such a high continued trend rate with those round 1 wide receivers that's non-existent with round 2 is because the expectations for year 1. And then going over to the end of round 2, we're continuing to see that it's probably a great idea to go out there and just continuously bet on these wide receivers in the second round. In the later rounds here, you have guys with great profiles compared to the running back position. At this point of the draft, there really are no running backs left that went in the second, third round of the NFL that continue to check every single box. Now, one example that does is Antonio Gibson. Y'all know I loved me some Antonio Gibson in that class because he checked every single box. He had the size, he had the speed, he had the passing game capability, he got the draft capital. So Antonio Gibson, one of my top targets. But very rarely should we be going after these players. Very rarely should we be trying to find the day 3 running back that we think is going to get opportunity, that we think is going to have success, when there are wide receivers like Chris Godwin, Deontay Johnson, that go on day 2 of the NFL draft that have a lot of exciting aspects of their profile, that have that upside. And we see that really by the time you get to this point, receiver tends to be the better bet. This trend continues going into round 3, where at the beginning of round 3, wide receivers gain value more after their rookie season and more after their second year. We see this same thing in mid-round 3, where wide receivers gain value way more often after year 1 and way more often after year 2. I mean, there were zero running backs that gained value from this range of the draft after their rookie season. And I honestly have an explanation for this. I think it's maybe based on just the psychology of a dynasty player. When they're going into their dynasty rookie drafts, and you know, dynasties are won mainly at the running back position. And that's why we say when you find a Breece Hall at the very top, when you find a Jonathan Taylor, when you find a 3-down bell cow running back on their rookie contract, there's nothing more valuable in dynasty. Dynasty running backs are extremely important. So when you're in your rookie draft and you're looking at John Mechie versus the running back 5, James Cook, you sit there and ask yourself, okay, am I really going to draft the wide receiver 12 here over the running back 5? Of course, this is just one example, but it is going to play out this season. In your mind, maybe your perception's a little bit skewed, thinking that, oh, I'm getting the running back 5 here at the beginning of round 3. Oh, I'm getting the running back 6, the running back 7 here at the beginning of round 3, where I'm taking the wide receiver 15. Maybe your perception's a little bit skewed in that we should see the fall off at the running back position for viable players at that spot, for the depth at running back to fall off a cliff way before receiver does. And the reason for this is very simple. How many running backs on an NFL roster are reasonably going to be scoring enough points for you to put into your starting lineup? On average, one. I would say on average, one. Of course, people are going to say, oh, well, Mason, you got the Cleveland Browns, you got Nick Chubb, you got Kareem Hunt. You have a couple of teams that you can start two running backs from. Yeah, you got maybe like 2 or 3 teams that's the case. But you also have a couple teams where you can't start any running backs. Because coaching staffs determine who is going to get the workload. Coaching staffs determine that some running backs will never get a fair shot, even if you like their profile. A lot of times you find that these guys just simply never get a chance. Even if they have a great profile and they go at the end of day 3, they have to jump 2 to 3 running backs on the depth chart just to get a shot. And when they do get that chance, when you finally find yourself James Robinson, I'll say a couple things here. James Robinson wasn't being drafted in Dynasty drafts in June. That's another thing. Very hard to find those players. A lot of times Dynasty managers completely miss them. Chris Carson, James Robinson, perfect examples of guys that aren't going to show up in this data because they weren't being drafted at this time. Yeah, they were great waiver wire pickups. And of course, pick up a player for free off the waiver wire, but that's a different story. Those players have to overcome so much. And even when they do, teams have no allegiance to those guys. Teams are willing to wash their hands. Where wide receivers like Stephon Diggs, like Chris Godwin, they're able to come from the depths, like Terry McLaurin, like Jarvis Landry, a lot of these guys in this round here. And the reason for this is when they're drafted to their team, think about it. There are going to be 5 to 6 receivers on that NFL roster. A lot of teams are running 3 to 4 wide receiver sets. So it's significantly easier to get on the field as a late round wide receiver than it would be with running back. So if you can identify a late round wide receiver that you think is talented, it's going to be much easier for that talented receiver that goes in round 4 of the NFL draft than the talented running back who goes in round 4 of the NFL draft to be able to get opportunity and sustain that opportunity, improve their talent at the NFL level, just because you're really only going to be one running back on the field the majority of the game, where there's going to be 3 to 4 wide receivers out there pretty much every play. Now, at the very end of round 3, yeah, you have some points clouding this data a little bit. You have Aaron Jones, of course, going out there and demolishing. And that's the worry. If you decide to go out there and just scratch these round 3 running backs off your board, occasionally you're going to miss on an Aaron Jones. But if you go pull up Aaron Jones' prospect profile, hell, he was big, he was fast, he caught passes. I mean, he checked every box besides that draft capital. He was probably going too low in these Dynasty rookie drafts. And at the very end of round 3, yeah, these rookie wide receivers essentially did nothing. Yeah, John Brown gaining a bunch of value, becoming a top 50 draft pick. But outside of that, really not a lot. But at the very end of Dynasty rookie drafts, a lot of times you should be preferring these receivers over the running backs. Like I said, I would love to know your opinion. If you think this is just too small of a sample, if you think I am missing out on some key data points here, let me know. I came into this literally with the exact opposite assumption. I thought that we were going to need to be going and drafting Alexander Madison. I thought we were going to need to be loading up on Darrington Evans. That's how I played Dynasty for the longest time. And I ignored guys like Chris Godwin. I ignored players like Kenny Golladay. I thought they were overhyped as rookies. And in reality, this data shows that I was wrong. I don't feel like I have any reason to go out there and skew this data. Please let me know if I'm doing something incorrectly that you believe. Of course, I'd be excited to go and add the rookies from this past year's class after this season to try to reevaluate here. But we already have hundreds of players with these lists. I think we've done a fine job with the sample size. And if we're talking about using this information for this draft class in particular, I think I'm going to have some key takeaways. In that the running back tier after Zamir White, let me pull up this list because there are a lot of names. A lot of these guys look bad. A lot of these players I almost have no interest in. James Cook, Zamir White, Dameon Pierce, Karen Williams, Jerome Ford, Brian Robinson. these players that are going to go day 3 of the NFL draft, of course, if one sneaks in, ends up going pick 70 or something, then we can reevaluate. But assuming these players go like round 4, they're probably off my draft board. I'm probably going to be loading up on some of the receivers with, nice profiles. Like Justin Ross is the perfect example. Justin Ross, you see a path to an elite level ceiling there. You saw Justin Ross outproduce T. Higgins when Justin Ross was 18 years old on that same roster with Hunter Renfrow, with Amari Rodgers. Like, you see that upside, you see that path with Justin Ross. And based on this information, I think chasing the wide receivers with that path, knowing that they have similar draft capital, both in dynasty drafts and in the NFL draft, compared to the running backs, they'll have a much easier path to get on the field and prove their talent where the running backs may not have that path. Going after someone like Justin Ross, John Mechie at the same time, someone we previously discussed. Alec Pierce is, someone that I'm not a big fan of. I think he's going to be a little bit more of a field stretcher. But Wan'Dale Robinson, another guy, checks a lot of boxes here, probably going to go a little bit later. But if we're comparing him to some of these running backs, give me the receiver, Jalen Tolbert. I think that these guys have a realistic chance of getting on the field, proving their talent, where I'm worried that the running backs don't have that opportunity. But of course, thank you all so much for being a part of the flock, supporting the channel. Really hope you all enjoyed this video. Please go down there, drop that like, leave a comment, subscribe to the channel. And most importantly, go get our Dynasty Research book. Go pre-order our Dynasty Rookie Draft Guide. Of course, you can find that on flockfantasy.com. Or if you go sign up for Underdog Fantasy, use promo code FLOCK, you will get our Dynasty Research book with way more information than we just had in this video, on top of our Dynasty rankings and our Dynasty Rookie rankings. But of course, thank you so much for being a part of the flock, supporting the channel. Hope you have a great day, and hope we get to see you with the video tomorrow.